young accountant Tommaso Ricci discovers secret payments sent to a man officially dead for decades. After uncovering the truth, the Mafia attempts to silence him with a bullet. During a secret meeting in Las Vegas, soldiers force powerful Mafia bosses to sign control contracts. Ricci slowly realizes the Mafia, government, and army secretly control the city together. After years of betrayal, bloodshed, and manipulation, Ricci becomes the syndicate's new leader. March 6, 1946. The basement archive of Greenwich Imports, Broome Street. Tommaso Ricci, 24 years old, junior accountant, union registry number 4412. Responsible for reconciling payments for building materials. In the ledgers covering 1941 to 1945, regular transactions totaling $4.2 million were discovered. The recipient, Arthur P. White. According to official records from the Chicago Department of Health, Arthur P. White died of Spanish flu on November 14, 1920. Death certificate number 883-B. The dead man owned 6,000 acres of land in Clark County, Nevada, where they are now driving piles into the sand. The archive smelled of old paper and rat poison. I looked at the numbers and saw a ghost richer than all the living dons of New York. March 11, 1946, 10:15 p.m. The second-floor office of La Stella Restaurant. Seated at the table, Don Giuseppe Moretti, my godfather. Moretti wasn't looking at the report. He was looking at his hands. He said that some secrets cost too much to carry inside a living head. A blued Colt 1911 was placed on the table. Moretti offered me two options: pull the trigger myself or trust the professionals in the alley. He called it washing knowledge away with blood, as if the sin was that I knew how to count to 10. March 12th, 0003, the alley behind Bleecker Street. One shot to the back of the head. A .32 caliber bullet grazed the skull, shattering the jaw and cheekbone. The shooter didn't bother to check for a pulse. The police report stated, robbery committed by an unknown assailant. Watch and wallet stolen. I lay in the mud tasting iron. The bullet cost 5 cents, but my silence was paid for from the late Mr. White's fund. The mob doesn't build Las Vegas. It leases it from the man whose name was erased from history before Prohibition. On the bill from St. Mary's Clinic, where they stitched up my face, was the stamp of that same trust fund. Death had been paid for in advance. August 15th, 1947, Las Vegas, Nevada. Highway 91, the grand opening of the Morpheus Hotel and Casino. Project cost $6.5 million. The heads of 24 criminal families arrived for the banquet in the main Sapphire Hall. Service staff, 80 people. Perimeter security, absent by mutual agreement. At 10:40 p.m. during the toast to the desert's prosperity, 30 waiters simultaneously dropped their trays. Thompson M1A1 submachine guns were drawn from beneath their uniform jackets. Fire was directed at chest level. The targets were only the personal bodyguards standing along the walls. In the first 12 seconds, approximately 400 rounds were expended. The hall's doors were blocked from the outside with steel bars. The air in the room turned gray with gunpowder smoke and plaster dust. The surviving bosses didn't hide under the tables. They sat motionless, staring at the smoking barrels in the hands of yesterday's boys. The commander of the attacking group ordered folders bearing the seal of the Department of Justice to be distributed to those present. Inside was a silence contract and forms for transferring 40% of casino shares. The documents implied the transfer of stakes into trust management to shell companies connected to the War Procurement Committee. In exchange, immunity from federal prosecution for 10 years was promised. The attackers moved with military precision. Each man had a 101st Airborne Division tattoo on his left forearm. I stood in the musician's alcove, gripping the handle of my revolver and wiping the sweat flooding my one good eye. Among the men in uniform, I spotted the sergeant giving the orders. Height, 6 feet, scar above the right eyebrow. My brother, Vincenzo Ricci. The November 44 death notice had said he burned in a tank near Bastogne. The state knows how to resurrect the dead when it needs quality killers. Vincenzo glanced toward the alcove but didn't fire. He simply adjusted his beret and nodded to the soldier at the door. The Don signed the papers quickly, not reading the fine print. That night, Vegas stopped belonging to the men who invented it. My brother walked past me, trailing the smell of army tobacco and cheap cologne we used to buy together in Brooklyn. On his way out of the hotel, he dropped an empty magazine on the floor and didn't look back. November 11, 1949, Route 66, 40 miles west of Kingman, Arizona, time 3:15. Combined unit, Tommaso Ricci and 4 gunmen from the O'Shea clan. Weapons, 2 M1 Garand rifles, a sawed-off shotgun, and a bundle of dynamite. Target, an armored International KB-8 truck. Per the Irish's intelligence, it contained $1.2 million in cash, a week's take from the Morpheus. The charge detonated under the front axle. The truck skidded, flipped, and crushed the cab. The driver and guard died instantly from broken necks. Breaking open the cargo hold took 8 minutes. Instead of cash bags, inside were 3 steel archive crates stamped "Property of the Department of Justice, Confidential." It was so quiet in the desert that I could hear the metal cooling. Money smells like nothing, but these papers reeked of death row. Contents of the crates: 412 personnel files. Names of active capos, lieutenants, and consiglieri from all 5 New York families. Next to each name, the date of recruitment and the monthly payment from the FBI. According to the documents, the faceless man wasn't merely paying taxes. He was buying the loyalty of the syndicate's upper echelon, turning the mob into a branch of the state apparatus. The Irish leader, Sean O'Shea, ordered the crates burned immediately after I had reviewed the first 10 names. He didn't look surprised. At 4:10, the lights of state patrol cars appeared on the horizon. O'Shea and his men fled in a backup vehicle, taking the keys to my Ford Super Deluxe. I realized the ambush had been a setup. The Irish had received orders from the syndicate, bring me to a place where I'd see the truth, then leave me to the law. My role was to legitimize the disappearance of the documents. If the witness is a fugitive bookkeeper with a shot-up face, his testimony in court is worth less than the paper it's written on. O'Shea said in parting that dead heroes don't cause problems, and live fools make excellent scapegoats. I stood by the burning truck, clutching to my chest the one folder I had managed to hide under my jacket. Inside the folder was my brother's file, Vincenzo Ricci, opened 2 years before his official death at the front. Behind me, the bolts of the Highway Patrol's rifles clicked. June 4th, 1952, Hotel Continental, Washington, D.C., room 412. A safe behind a painting with a view of the Potomac. Contents of the safe: microfilms and 12 leather-bound notebooks. Inside, meeting dates, bank box numbers, and kickback amounts for 6 members of the Senate Committee on Organized Crime. According to the records, Senator Campbell received $850,000 for lobbying the Nevada gaming licensing law. The money passed through shell accounts in Havana banks. This was my leverage, the only way to make the system devour itself before I turned to dust at the bottom of a canyon. June 6th, 2 p.m., Rock Creek Park. A meeting with federal prosecutor Harvey Miller. Miller arrived without an escort as agreed in the phone call. The prosecutor offered a deal: full amnesty, new identities for me and Maria, plus a lifetime annuity in exchange for the original archive. The moment Miller reached for the folder, his head lurched forward. A .30-06 bullet entered precisely at the back of the skull, staining my documents red. The crack of the shot rolled in from the direction of the hill 2 seconds later. Range, 400 yards. Clean work by a Special Forces professional. I sprinted to the car, where Maria was waiting in the passenger seat. In her hands, I saw a Springfield M1903 rifle with a unertal scope mounted. The barrel was still smoking. She looked at me without fear and without love, the way you look at an inventory number due for write-off. Maria said the archive should never have left the family. She was not a baker's daughter from Little Italy. She had been the syndicate's eyes in my bed for the past 5 years. Love is also work, if you're paid for it from the same funds as the killers. The wail of Metropolitan Police sirens came from behind. Maria placed the rifle on the back seat and held out her hand for the folder that was still tucked under my jacket. September 1st, 1955, Las Vegas, 2 o'clock. 3 explosive charges have been planted at the North Strip substation. At 2:14, the neon signs of the Morpheus, Flamingo, and Tropicana hotels went dark simultaneously along the Strip. For the first time in the city's history, the darkness was absolute. A crew of 20 men, hired through the Dockworkers Union, broke into the central vaults of 3 casinos, seized $12 million in cash and senators' promissory notes worth $30 million. The city froze. The silence was so dense you could hear the sand cooling in the desert. At 4:30, a convoy of 40 GMC trucks and 10 M8 Greyhound armored cars moved out from Nellis Air Force Base. Official order: suppression of terrorist threats to facilities of national importance. The Strip District was cordoned off with barbed wire in 40 minutes. Fully equipped infantrymen took up positions in casino lobbies. I watched from the roof of a laundromat. The army wasn't arresting the robbers. It was simply occupying territory it had always considered its own. The syndicate documents I had hoped to use contained more than financial records. The folder marked Object 44 held blueprints of underground levels beneath the hotels. The depth of the concrete structures, 150 feet. The total area of the bunkers beneath Vegas exceeded the combined floor space of all the gaming halls 3 times over. The casinos were merely a glittering facade funding the construction of the largest nuclear test site and government shelters. Every dollar lost at the roulette wheel went towards cement for walls built to outlast humanity. The people at the tables believed they were buying a shot at luck. In reality, they were paying one-way tickets for those who would push the button. At 6 o'clock, a mushroom cloud rose over the desert, a scheduled test at the proving ground 60 miles away. The tremors shattered windows at the Morpheus, but not one of the soldiers flinched. I saw my brother Vincenzo at the hotel entrance. He was saluting a man in civilian clothes whose face was hidden beneath the brim of his hat. On the tables in the Sapphire Hall lay uncollected chips covered in a thin layer of radioactive ash. November 14, 1957, Appalachian, New York. The estate of Joseph Barbara, 11 o'clock. The heads of 62 criminal families from across the country had convened. Agenda: the Las Vegas incident and the sentencing of Tommaso Ricci for provoking military intervention. I stood in the center of the basement hall, surrounded by men whose names made entire states tremble. On the table lay my report from the 1946 archive and the Object 44 folder. According to the documents presented, Arthur P. White, deceased in 1920, was present in this room. The signature on the 1947 contracts and the 1955 directives matched the handwriting of one of the oldest Dons. I pointed to Don Giuseppe Moretti, my godfather, the man who had ordered my death 11 years ago. The room fell quieter than a morgue before an autopsy. No one reached for a weapon. Everyone was waiting to see who would look away first. Moretti did not deny it. He said the Mafia was merely a department within the ministry, handling dirty laundry while politicians tailored their dress uniforms. At 1320, state police forces and FBI agents under the command of Edgar Hoover converged on the estate. It was the first large-scale raid on the syndicate in American history. The estate's security detail, composed of battle-hardened men, did not fire a single shot. They simply stepped aside to clear the way for the Federals. Those the Dons had called their sons now wore badges beneath their jackets and followed orders from a man who had never officially existed. Arthur P. White was not an enemy of the syndicate. He was its creator, working for the government since the very end of the First World War. We were not free hunters, but sheepdogs on a leash held by a butcher. When the agents entered the basement, Moretti stood and extended his hands for the handcuffs, giving me a barely perceptible smile through a bloodied mouth. One of the FBI agents approached the table and silently took all the evidence folders without logging them in the seizure report. February 12, 1959, Chicago, Illinois, 1422 South Halsted Street, the abandoned Edelweiss Laundry. The building's basement was equipped with industrial furnaces by Miller & Co., model 1932. In municipal service registries, the facility had been listed as inactive since 1934. Behind a false panel in the operator's room, an archive was found. 4,800 index cards. Name, country of origin, date of disposal, bank certificate number for gold. According to ledgers from 1930 to 1933, the syndicate had seized assets from immigrants under the guise of mandatory life insurance. The total sum amounted to $18 million in gold equivalent. That metal became the collateral for the first loans used to develop the Nevada desert. Vegas grew from teeth and wedding rings that never made it to the smelter. The furnaces were cold, but the smell of burnt wool and bleach seemed to have soaked into the concrete itself. In the card index for 1928, I found 2 entries: Ricci, Antonio, and Ricci, Lucia. Place of birth, Palermo. Cause of death, industrial incident. The signature of the inspector who certified the deaths, Giuseppe Moretti. That same month, he filed for guardianship over their 5-year-old son. Moretti didn't just raise me, he fed me crumbs from a table he had set on the bones of my parents. An accountant is a man who always balances the books in the end. even if he has to burn down the entire bank to do it. On the back of my mother's card was a receipt for .38 caliber ammunition, written off as security needs on the day of her death. I put the cards in my pocket and doused the shelves with gasoline. In the laundry's doorway stood a man in a long coat, whose shadow fell across the threshold in a clean rectangle. November 10th, 1961, Hoover Dam, 3 o'clock. 200 pounds of C4 explosive have been planted in technical tunnel number 4. The charge is powerful enough to destroy the generator hall. This would cut Las Vegas off from 80% of its power and flood the lower levels of the syndicate's bunkers. I stepped out of the shadows on the strip with a detonator in my hand. The military police patrol did not open fire. At 4:15, a high-speed elevator at the Morpheus lifted me to the 30th floor, the Olympus penthouse. There was no guard in the hall and no Don Moretti. In the center of the room, on a marble pedestal, stood a full-length mirror in a frame of black oak. A voice from the building's PA speakers announced that Arthur P. White was not a person, but an asset management protocol, a title passed along together with the archive. The position of the faceless man had become vacant after Moretti failed to eliminate the information leak, namely me. I was now being offered signing authority, full control over the Havana accounts and the desert bunkers, on the condition of an absolute renunciation of the past. On the floor in front of the mirror lay 2 bound people, my brother Vincenzo and my wife Maria. Beside them, a blued high-standard pistol with a silencer. According to the rules of power transfer, the new custodian must sever all biological ties to his previous identity. My brother looked at me as though we still shared a bunk in Brooklyn. Maria closed her eyes. Eliminating witnesses is not revenge. It is simply the closing of an unprofitable account. The syndicate likes clean balance sheets. I picked up the pistol and felt the metal cold against my palm. The weight of the weapon was familiar, but my hand felt like someone else's. The voice on the speakers announced that the time available to make a decision was limited by the detonator's battery life. In the mirror, I saw not myself, but an empty space that would soon be filled with numbers and reports. The first click of the safety rang out. On November 9th, 1962, at 10:45 p.m., in the penthouse of the Dunes Hotel, Las Vegas, Nevada, a merger of assets protocol was signed. The Council of the 5 Families unanimously recognized Tommaso Ricci as capo di tutti capi. The syndicate's official turnover under his management reached $480 million by year's end. 7 casinos, 3 construction unions, and a controlling stake in the North's textile industry. That night, the neon on the strip blazed so brightly that 10 miles out in the desert, you could read a newspaper by it. I looked at those lights and understood. We had bought this city, but had forgotten to ask whether peace was for sale here. On January 12, 1963, Tommaso gave the order to liquidate 3 key port warehouses in New Jersey. Places that had fed us for 30 years were blown up on his personal command. He began systematically destroying the logistical chains he himself had built since the 40s. Accountants recorded losses exceeding gambling revenue, but no one dared to demand an explanation. A note appeared in security service reports. Subject displays signs of irrational behavior, threatening structural stability. The system did not need a saint. It needed an administrator. On February 14th, the anniversary of the old massacre, 2 of my best shooters, men I had personally trained to keep their distance, went dark. By evening, they were found in the trunk of a Lincoln with FBI passes in their pockets. My own security service had begun purging Marini's inner circle. The hunters had become the prey because the syndicate's security protocol ranked above loyalty to any one man. On March 20th, Tommaso summoned me to his office and silently placed on the table a photograph from the file of Operation 5 Kings. The image showed a young lieutenant in Marine Corps dress uniform with his eyes and his way of holding a cigarette. The son we had buried in an empty coffin in '44 was standing on a pier in San Diego, surrounded by men from the Council of the 5 Families. Those who had grown tired of waiting for our mistake had been grooming him to replace us. The syndicate always finds a way to refresh the bloodline, even if that blood is your own son's. On March 21st, 1963, at 4 o'clock, Tommaso Ricci, for the first time in 40 years, did not check whether his Colt was loaded. November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas, Hotel Adolphus, room 1204, windows overlooking Elm Street, 12:15 p.m. Tommaso Ricci sat in an armchair in complete darkness. On the oak table lay 3 items: a disassembled Remington 700 rifle, a .30-06 cartridge, and the leather-bound black book of 1946. He didn't turn on the lights. The neon of the Vegas night had been left behind in another life. Here, there was only the gray light of a Texas noon and dust dancing on the polished barrel. At 12:28, the door to the room opened without being forced. The person who entered used a duplicate key issued only to top-tier staff and trusted syndicate associates. A young man in a gray 3-piece suit and a felt hat stopped at the threshold. In his right hand, he held a Smith & Wesson Model 36 with a silencer. His fingers did not tremble. Tommaso did not turn his head. He simply stated that in Box 402 at Mercantile National Bank lay a key that would resolve all questions of succession. The son stepped up close. The pathologist's report would later state, shot fired from a distance of less than 10 inches, powder burn on the temple consistent with the caliber of the weapon. At the bottom of the bank box, opened 2 hours later, there were no bonds, no cash. There was a sealed envelope addressed to the editorial office of the New York Times, stamped, "Sent immediately upon my death." It contained a confession 400 pages long, dates, senators' names, account numbers, and the coordinates of syndicate burial grounds spanning the past 40 years. The system had been designed to consume whoever pulled the trigger. By killing his father, he had pressed the detonator that buried the entire empire along with himself. On November 30th, 1963, the courier service delivered the package to the newsroom precisely on schedule.